All right, welcome to another episode of ICU Doc Talk. Today, I'm going to talk about something completely different. I'm not even going to talk about medicine. I'm going to talk about how to write a book. And because I've written several books, I just finished. The reason I'm celebrating, sort of, this is kind of a celebration. I just finished writing my sixth novel. I've published 5 novels, and I just finished my sixth one. I just finished the rough draft, and I'm excited about it. But the reason I want to talk about this, I'm going to kind of go to the process. Whoever's interested about how to write a book, a novel, and this isn't just for writers. The reason I'm talking about this topic today is to encourage you, the listener. There is something like for me, I love writing, right? It's like my passion aside from medicine. It's to encourage you, that thing that you have. So writing is my thing. You have a thing too. Everybody does. And if you don't, there is something that you want to make it your thing, but you haven't been able to. And I want to talk about how to write a book, but I want to also couch this in with, you can do creative things that expand your mind and enrich your soul while also pursuing other worthy endeavors like your career or having a family or things like that. So that's what I want to talk about today. I'm going to go through the process, my journey of writing, how I write novels while also being in medicine. I wrote my first novel when I was in medical school. Let's just talk about that. And my intent is to inspire you to pursue the thing that you've been wanting to do. Here we go. Oh, and I just realized I needed to have a caveat talking about these things. This is not about hustle culture. That's not what this topic is. This isn't about, hey, maximizing your time and using your time more efficiently to have higher output and to earn passive income, right? That's nonsense. I'm not trying to do that. Obviously, I'm not selling you anything. Or, usually when conversations start out like that, like this hustle culture, like, hey, you should, instead of watching Netflix, you should run a multi-level marketing scheme. Right? That's not what this is about. Hustle culture is toxic. It is a toxic thing. We're like, hey, this isn't about making more money. This is about enriching yourself and being more fulfilled through artistic and creative endeavors. That is what I'm talking about today. Okay. All right. So let me start with my journey as a writer. So backing it up, when I always loved writing ever since I can remember. I grew up in a household where I was the youngest child, with several siblings, and I grew up in a household where everybody was just reading. Like, that was just a normal thing, like reading books, right? Not that we didn't do other stuff like watch TV and stuff like that. My mom was a high school teacher. My dad was a lawyer. So, they're educated people. And I grew up middle class in suburbs, right? My point is, reading was it was normalized. Like, hey, reading books is a thing that, you can do when you're bored. So I grew up reading books. Michael Crichton and John Grisham were like some of my first favorite writers that I read. And I delved into a lot of different writers, right? Like Kurt Vonnegut and Stephen King and, all these awesome writers, American writers. I got into English literature, all that stuff. My mom knew a lot about humanities, right, and lots of different literature. So that was a part of my upbringing, which I'm very grateful for, right? So I always wanted to be a writer at an early age. I remember being like, I don't know, I was probably 12 or 14 or something, and I said I wanted to write my first book. I was like, I'm going to write a book about a lawyer, probably because I was influenced by John Grisham, and my dad was a lawyer too. So, and I remember sitting down with an old, like an ancient computer, and writing a first page about someone being accused of a crime that they weren't, and they didn't commit. Anyway, I didn't go anywhere with that, right? I didn't actually finish that, but I was like, oh man, I want to write a book. So anyway, and then through high school, I was very much into creative writing. I was on like the literary magazine staff at my high school, and I was very much into writing poetry, and stuff like that. So that's kind of my background. So I've always enjoyed writing, right? And then one time in high school, I had the poet laureate of the state that I lived in came to our creative writing class, and he was a cool guy. And I remember him saying something like, "Do you think I get paid to be the poet laureate of this state?" And he was like, "No." And basically his advice, my memory at least of this was, you should just keep writing on the side. Don't try to make it a career, because it's not something that you really get paid to do. And I took that advice very serious. I really did. And when I went to college, I never took a single class of creative writing or writing, period. I just didn't. I didn't do any. I really didn't do. I didn't pursue that from an academic standpoint. I went into the sciences. I went into chemistry. And then, obviously went to med school and all that stuff. I still loved writing. I still read books, right? I've been reading books ever since I was very young. And obviously I still like to read a lot of books now. So I never lost that passion, that love I have for writing and for literature. Never. I always loved to read just any sort of books I could get my hands on, like fantasy and sci-fi and lots of stuff like that. And then I don't know, I think and then I actually in college, I did try to start writing some short stories just for fun, like about a time traveling love thing that was only like 10 pages on a legal pad, right? Which I still have. I think I still have that, which I've actually intended to write into a novel, because I think it's an interesting idea still. Anyway, I still toyed with it, but nothing ever serious. And then at the end of college, I started writing a zombie novel, just for fun. I've always loved the zombie genre, post-apocalyptic. I'm such a sucker for post-apocalyptic. Still am to this day. I still love zombie genre and post-apocalyptic. I find zombies fascinating. The concept of a zombie, I still find extremely fascinating. The dehumanization, yet they're still alive, but they're not human anymore. It's just, I've always loved the concept, and I love the story of the outbreak of a zombie apocalypse. Love that story, that trope. So I started writing a story about it, right? That started happening in New York. Anyway, I started just writing a novel. And then through medical school, I continued writing this just for fun in the background. When you get to medical school, you don't work. You just go to class. And so, I studied and all that stuff. But I would write, and I did it leisurely. Okay, I did it leisurely. I was like, I'll have some fun. I'll write a little bit. And then as I started writing more and more, I realized, like, I've written like 20,000 words, which is a good amount of words to write. For if you're trying to write a novel, that's like maybe the length of a novella at that point. And I'm like, I'm going to keep going with this. And I really don't know how long it took, but I think I finished it in like my third year of medical school. I finished it. It was 100,000 words. That's like a 300 or 400 page novel. And it felt incredible to finish it. I was like, wow, I finished it. Now, it wasn't good. Okay. It was not a good book. But it was fun. I had fun doing it. And that's one of the points. It was really fun to write this novel. And then the sense of accomplishment. Like, wow, I finished a novel. The reason I did it is because it was something I enjoyed, and I didn't have a timeline. It was not something I was pressured into doing. It was something I enjoyed on the side. Now, I just did it here and there, right? I still played video games. I still went to med school. I still studied. I passed my exams, stuff like that. I still had relationships. I had a girlfriend at the time, right? So it wasn't like that wasn't the sole purpose that I was doing. It was just something I enjoyed that I did, and I got a sense of accomplishment from it. And then I had one of my good friends read it, and he was like, "Yeah, it's good. It's good, right?" He's like, "It's a fun book." And at this point, I am not a good writer, right? And then just for fun, and this is a key point that I'm going to get to, I was like, I'm going to pitch this book to some publishers, right? I'm going to just send it in the email to some publishers and some agents for fun. I picked like 3 or 4 publishers, and I just sent it to them. I didn't have anybody else beta read it. I didn't have an editor look at it. Nothing like that, okay? And then like 2 weeks later, a publisher wanted to pick it up. Let me emphasize, this book was not good. And in retrospect, this publisher didn't make a good decision because it wasn't that good of a book. It's not a good book. Now, I think the story is fun, but the writing was atrocious. Like, I'm actually embarrassed by this book. But anyway, they were like, this is fun. This is fun. We want to pick this up. And so they did. It was a publisher called Severed Press in Australia. And they picked it up and they published it. And in my 4th year of medical school, I published a book through a publisher. So it was dumb luck that they picked it up. The reason I know this is since then, with other books, I have tried getting agents and publishers with different books. It's so hard to do. It is so difficult for a publisher or an agent to pick up your book. It's extremely hard to do. It was sheer dumb luck that a publisher picked it up. And it is a small publisher, right? It's not like a big house publisher. Anyway, so that was amazing, right? That was great. When I opened up that email, I'm like, hey, we don't want to pick up your book. That was incredible. It was like, whoa, I cannot believe this happened. So that was a very exciting time. Anyway, I graduated from medical school, and then I went to residency, and the publisher was like, hey, write a sequel. Because it sold, I don't know, probably sold like 7,000 copies or something like that. And they were like, write a sequel. And I was like, all right, I don't really want to write about zombies anymore. But I wrote a sequel, and I was writing a different book at that time, a sci-fi book, which is really what I wanted to write. But this publisher was like, write a sequel to the zombie book. And I was like, all right. So during my intern year and residency, so I wrote a sequel to this book. It was another 100,000 word book. And again, there wasn't a deadline, and I took my time with it. And I was unmarried and didn't have any children. All right, so that's a key point, right? I was in a long-distance relationship, and I worked a lot, but I came home, and I was in a long-distance relationship, so it was just kind of me, right? So I need to caveat this with, I did not have a family at this time, right? This would have been a very difficult thing to do. So I wrote a sequel to it, probably took me a year and a half or something like that. And I swear I'm going to get into how to write a book, what I started with this. I'm going to get into that in a second. So I wrote that, and they published it. And then that book did not do very well. People didn't care about it, I was surprised about, because the second book was way better than the first, and people loved, some people loved the first book. The second book was way better in like every way. But anyway, so I was like, whatever. So here's the thing though. After you write a book, I was like, whoa, I wrote a book. I can write another book. And so I immediately just started writing books. I just started, my free time here and there. Not being like, I have to write this many words a day. Nothing like that. Just going with the natural ebb and flow of whatever my creativity dictated. So I would go weeks without writing. Or 1 week I would write like 10,000 words. So it was just the ebbs and flows of whatever my creativity dictated in that moment. Nothing top down, nothing demanding of it. And I think that's really key to unleashing your creativity. It must be natural. It must be spontaneous to write. So I picked up back the sci-fi book I was writing, which is called Refraction. And then I finished that at the end of residency, and I started writing another book called Dark Theory, which I eventually published. I actually published that just last year. I was working on that for quite some time, which is a 200,000 page book. And then when I was in fellowship, I wrote a short novel about an anesthesiologist that breaks bad. So anyway, my point is the ball started to roll. Right. Once that top was off and I could see like, hey, I can write a book. This is a thing I can do. I've done it. I can keep doing it. So that's kind of my journey through writing and being right. And then now I self-publish. I got into the self-publishing game and know how to self-publish. And that's part of my hobby. I enjoy self-publishing. I enjoy working with editors and artists and cover designers and marketing myself through social media and stuff like that. It's part of the hobby that I really do enjoy. And then now that I'm an anesthesiologist and critical care physician, and I have a family and a daughter, I still write books. I published a book last year, and as I said, I just finished a rough draft on my next book just last week, which I will probably publish this fall. And I still keep that same like carefreeness about it, spontaneous, and not having this top down like, oh, it's something I must get done. It's just something I do in the background. Okay, but now let's back it up. So I'm not like, it's not like a superhuman feat to do this. I think one of the keys, so let me just zoom it out here. This isn't just about writing a book. This is about pursuing something you're passionate about, where you put in your own creativity, and it's also a work of effort. You put in effort. It's a work of love. You're very passionate about it, while at the same time having other parts of your life, right? And I would submit that we must have these aspects of our life, because life cannot just be about the drudgery of a career. It cannot just be about raising a family, if that is something you choose to do. You must have a creative output to be happy. I firmly believe that. the human mind is designed for creativity, right? I mean, our brains are absolutely amazing at unleashing creativity. And I think we have to have that to be happy. So here, I think is one. So people ask me all the time, like, "Oh, how do you write a book? How do you do all this stuff and you write books?" I am not a highly regimented, structured person. I'm not a type A personality. I don't think. Maybe I am. I'm not like a person that's like obsessive. I don't have OCD. Let me also, another caveat, I don't suffer from from psychiatric disorder. Okay. So I'm blessed and fortunate to not suffer, at least I don't think, of a psychiatric disorder, right? So like it's easier for me to like, oh, hey, look at this, I can do this thing. But like, it's not like I've been suffering from major depression my whole life, or ADD, ADHD, right? Or obsessive compulsive disorder. I have not suffered major trauma in my life. I don't have major childhood trauma. So I'm very fortunate that I haven't suffered those things. If I had, maybe I would not have done these things, right? So I live a life of privilege in many ways, obviously. And I was born into a life of privilege by, number one, being the color of my skin. I won't get too much into that, but it's very obvious. And then being raised in a middle class suburban family where I had my nutritional needs met and my emotional needs met, and I had good public education, right? So that needs to be said, right? I can do these things, but it's not like I started from scratch. Okay, so having said all that stuff, I think one of the keys to pursuing your creative goals and balancing your life, this is one of the main take homes. And it's hard. It might be hard for some people. Do not be a perfectionist. That is one of the keys. I think that is one of the reasons I've been able to accomplish this, is I am not a perfectionist, like at all. I am the type of person that like will cobble something together and be like, it's good enough. Let's see how it goes. I'm also a person that thrives on improvisation. What's the word? Improvising on something in the moment, right? I'm not like, which doesn't say I don't plan things, right? And I do have obviously some structure in my life, but not being a perfectionist, being okay with something being crappy. That is how I have written books. That is one of the main ways I've written books. I just like, so how do you write a book? Okay. This is how I do it. I have a rough outline. I have an idea of a plot, an idea. I have an idea. And I'm like, that would be that's cool. That might be a good idea. But an idea is not a plot, right? And taking an idea and stretching it into a plot, that's where people get stuck. So I don't outline. I don't have this perfect outline before I start writing. I have an idea. So like the book I just finished, that I just wrote, I got the idea for it while running in a park in San Francisco. That's where I got the idea. And I was like, whoa, this is going to be a great book. And now I have it. I've written it out. Did I have the whole plot figured out? Absolutely not. I don't even know when I start writing a book, I have no idea how it's going to end as I'm writing it. I'm often halfway through writing a book and I still don't know how it's going to end. That is how, that's how I do it. I don't outline it all out. I don't plan it all out. I don't have it all perfect and then start writing. If you do that, if you are like, I have to have everything planned out, maybe some people are able to do that and then finish. You're never going to finish the project. For most people, I think this advice is true. You will never finish it. And maybe finishing it is not the point. Maybe it's the act of engaging in creative work. That's the point of it. Maybe not having a finished project is always the point. So I don't want to say that like that's bad, but one of the reasons I'm able to do this is I'm not a perfectionist. I just like, I just kind of write, blah, 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 blah. This isn't very good. That's fine. I'll just keep moving. Just keep writing. And then I have a finished product and it's bad. And then you go over it again and again. It's just like whittling. Writing is just like you grab a piece, you want to whittle a spoon out of a branch. That spoon doesn't just pop out of the branch. You take I know this maybe it's sounding contrived, but you take your knife and you shave off a piece of wood and it still doesn't look like a spoon. It looks bad. You just keep whittling and whittling and whittling and whittling and whittling over and over again until you have more of a polished product. That is the artistic process. And being a perfectionist and expecting perfection of yourself up front is what stops people from engaging in their creative endeavors. I really, really believe that to be true. This idea that you have to, it's the same thing with anything, drawing portraits, engaging in any sort of like art or craft like that. People are like, hey, it's not what they want to begin with. And you get frustrated, you become discouraged, and you don't want to engage in it anymore because it's painful, it hurts. You're like, I don't like this. And I don't know how to tell you how to not be a perfectionist. I don't know. I don't know how to tell you how to not be that way, because being a perfectionist is not something you can just not be. I think it's often a personality type as well. But I think that is one of the main ways that you can engage in something creative and then not having rules, not having time constraints on you, and keeping it as a side gig, keeping it as something that you do on the side that you enjoy. If I were to write full time, I would probably enjoy writing less. And maybe I would even write less if I wrote full time, if I were a full time writer, which I'm not. I'm a full time physician. But then how do you find the time? That I get that question asked a lot as well. You can find the time. If it's something, I really believe this. People find the time, assuming you have your needs met and you're not impoverished, right? Again, I fully realize this whole episode, I'm speaking from a place of privilege, but so this is all predicated on the assumption that you have your needs met, your nutritional needs met. You're not hungry. You have health care, probably. You have a job, right? So I do recognize all this stuff. What was my point? So assuming you have all your needs met, you can find the time for your endeavors. I know you can. Now there's the mental energy going into it, but I know you can, right? Think how often someone talks about how they binge watched their favorite show over the weekend or over. I understand you still need leisure time, and binge watching is leisure time. That's leisure time, right? You also need leisure time. People need leisure time for. I have leisure time, right? Not a lot, particularly with an amazing little daughter at home that I spend all my time with. But you have to have leisure time, right? You can't replace creativity time with leisure time. You have to have time to decompress for your mental health. That's a must. But my point is, think of all the times you're at work or whatever. Like, oh yeah, I binge watched that show last week. Like that was, you literally just put in possibly 10 to 20 hours last week into watching a show. You could take an hour of that to do the thing that you want, whether it's learning to play the violin or journaling or gardening, whatever it is, whatever is the corollary for you, the thing that you are passionate about, you can do. Now there's things about, there's motivation. There's being motivated to do these things. There's being the right mental space to do these things. So I know I'm trying, I hope I'm not making this sound like, hey, this is easy, just do it. I know it's much more complicated than that. But the where do you find the time? Again, assuming you have your needs met, I know you can find the time because I find the time. But sometimes I don't, I won't write for weeks. But then sometimes I get an idea for this next part, and I'm like, and then I'll find the time here and there, while my daughter's napping, or sometimes at night, something, a little bit here and there, and you find the time to do it. I just think it's ironic that I think one of the keys to pursuing a lot of your goals in your life, I think, are actually the opposite of what people think they believe that they are. Like, being goal-oriented and perfectionist and type A personality and having a structured goal and writing your goals down, blah, blah, blah. These are all just platitudes. I don't think that's the key at all. I think the key is the opposite, is being laid back about it as much as possible, having no pressure, particularly not being a perfectionism about the product that you produce, perfectionist about it, whatever that may be. I think it's the opposite. And spontaneity, being, creativity ebbs and flows through you, and being spontaneous with it, I think is the key. For me, this has been my experience. What has worked for me. Now, I wish that we lived in more of a society that valued these things. Right? We live in a society that the first thing you do when you meet someone is you ask them what they do for a living, which I hate, because your job and your career is not what you do. That's not your life. It's not your identity. It's a part of your identity. It's part of who you are. But I just don't think it should be identity, right? I don't think it should be a part of our identity. So we live in a society that values this more. It values, money and output. And that's part of this hustle culture that I alluded to earlier, which is toxic. So I wish we had more time, and that we put more emphasis and value on the creative aspirations that we have as human beings, and how much we would enrich our lives and our souls and our communities and our children. But that's just not the society that we live in the United States at least, and in most Western cultures that are based on economic output and economic growth. Unfortunately, that is the reality. But I'm just here to tell you that I think you can pursue the thing that you're thinking about. If you've been listening this whole time, go do it right now. Turn off this podcast and go find some time today. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. There is something that just lights your brain and your heart on fire when you pursue these things, and it just makes life just that much more, worth living. I think another thing, just to talk about this, about, trying to achieve whatever your goals are, or trying to pursue, this creative outputs. For me, I think a lot of it has to do with, differences of personality and difference of how someone goes about problem solving and structuring their lives. And for me, typically the way I operate is I'm very linear with problem solving and very linear with how I perform tasks, right? So, in college, if I had to study for a test or something like a final exam, I would, study consistently throughout the semester. And then if I had a final exam, 2 weeks before, I would be like, I'm going to study in this way, in a very regimented way. And then if I go about house tasks or things like that around the house, the things that need to be done, I'm quite linear. And the same thing goes with my writing, right? I'm very linear with how I tackle problems. And with that linearity, whatever, comes compartmentalization. So I think I'm able to compartmentalize challenges and things in my life. The reason I say this is not everybody operates that way, right? So oftentimes people will have non-linear problem solving. And I think a lot of people with ADHD have non-linear problem solving, right? Where you're juggling many things in your mind at once. And for better or worse, I'm not saying there's a good way or a bad way to go about things, but that can be someone's way of also problem solving, which can sometimes be like obstructing of something that you do want to get done. So I do think a lot of this has to do with just how someone operates, and I know there's a lot of there's neurodivergence, there's a lot of divergence with how people do things. So please take what I'm saying here today with a grain of salt. Like, there's many ways to go about achieving things that you want to do, and this is just one way that I've done it. This is the way one person has done it, and there's no template. I think you need to find what's right for you and try to be as happy as possible. Anyway, I'll just leave it at that. I hope you enjoyed the topic. All right, let's talk about a nonfiction book this week. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to talk about a book called Poverty by America. It's by Matthew Desmond. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning guy. He wrote Evicted, which I actually have not read. But this is a book he just released last month, March 2023. And it's a short read. It's 300 pages. I listened to the audiobook, which was very well done. Obviously, this book is about poverty in America. And one of the main things that he says, one of the main points of this book is poverty can be abolished. It's within our capability easily. Maybe not easy. Easy is not the right word. It's not like a utopian dream world to think that there is a route to actually abolish poverty right now. It's not some future utopia. It's not an exaggeration. And it could happen nearly overnight. One of the main things that this book talks about and is kind of thematic is that poverty exists in tandem with wealth. It does not exist in isolation, which is what a lot of people would want you to believe, like politicians and people that represent corporate interests would want you to believe that poverty exists in isolation, meaning it is the consequence of individual actions, right? But it exists in tandem. It is the yin and yang, right? Poverty and wealth. They're inseparable. And Desmond, the author, makes it pretty clear in this book that if you're not poor, you are benefiting from the impoverished. He casts away the stereotypes that it is the impoverished that persists off that subsists off of the government nanny state. And he shows that it is actually the very rich and the middle class that exploit the government even more through tax breaks and subsidies. If you simply just taxed capital and the rich more and stopped giving a leg up to people that already have wealth accumulation and targeted those government funds into people that were actually poor, poverty could be abolished without adding a dime to the deficit. We have an entire tax system designed by the rich and for the rich, including low capital gains taxes, mortgage interest deduction, and overall extremely regressive taxing on capital, right? I'm not talking about income tax, which is progressive. I'm talking about tax on capital, actual money, which is regressive. The more you have, the less you're taxed on it. We don't even need to get into the multinational companies completely avoiding taxes and the ridiculously low corporate taxes, the low estate taxes, no inheritance taxes, and the absence of a wealth tax. And no, taxing capital less does not lead to trickle-down wealth. Supply-side economics is a corporate lie. It is demonstrably not true, as evidenced by wage stagnation and nearly flat poverty rates for the last 40 years. Poverty has not improved, and neither has wealth distribution. The author makes it pretty clear that most government aid doesn't even go to the poor, even though it's earmarked for them, and states widely misuse government-funded programs designed to benefit the poor. And let's not mention the myriad ways in which the poor are exploited. Suppressed wages, non-compete contracts, forced in-house arbitration, contracted work, the gig economy, right? The list goes on and on and on and on. Housing zoning ordinances are basically just rebranded redlining. What that means is housing ordinances being like, oh, you can't have multifamily homes in this neighborhood, right? It's basically redlining. It's what it is. It's what it is. Because what kinds of families are seeking, a multifamily unit, want to live there, right? It's people that are of lower economic status, and it's people that usually do not have skin that is white. So when you have these zoning ordinances, it's basically just redlining 2.0. The argument that, well, anyone can just invest money, right? It's ridiculous. The entrance fee to grow your wealth is extremely high, and it falls along racial lines. And the majority of stocks are owned by a minority of the very rich. The author sheds like the ideological monikers that come inevitably with debates like this about Marxism and communism and socialism. Just shed the ideology. Just forget these terms. And he really gets into the technical details and the wonky details about how to engineer a poverty-free society. In this way, Desmond, he's basically a technocrat and clearly supports a social democratic policy, which I do too. That's what a technocrat is. A technocrat is someone who gets in there and starts tweaking policy to try to have better outcomes. I personally don't care what someone wants to call it to align with their ideology, whatever. You call this whatever you want. So call it social democracy. Don't call it communism, and don't call it socialism. If you do, you're wrong, because that's not what this is. Taxing the rich is not communism. Ugh. But the facts are that our system supports an aristocracy, right? This system supports an aristocracy. That's just a fact. There's nothing free about American markets. A system that is actually pro-competitive market, not pro-business, and taxes capital progressively to bolster the social state, that would benefit our entire society. Key question is technocracy, that's what this book is about. And I've read many books like this, like many, many books. This is a good book, and it's a nice primer, and it's a nice overview. But this book is about technocracy. It's about being a technocrat and trying to tweak things. So is technocracy enough to implement these changes? In my opinion, it absolutely is not, given how differentiated, how heterogeneous, how polarized our political system is. To write a book like this and be like, this is how you do it, it's not enough. And I'm not being critical of this book. It's a very good book. But to believe, and I don't think Desmond believes this, I'm just kind of talking about someone else who might read a book and be like, oh, this is good. I'll go run for office and I will implement these changes. That is not enough. You can't. It's not possible. And Desmond gets into it a little bit at the end, talking about, there's being anti-racist, and he talks about being anti-poverty, rather not as opposed to being anti-racist, but in addition, anti-poverty action. Like instead of corporations are all concerned about having this look of being like anti-racist, like Black Lives Matter logos or whatever else it is, which is fine. Again, I'm not being critical of that. But this author is like, why don't you ask how much are they paying their workers, right? What's their minimum wage? Like ask them that, ask a company that, find out that. In addition to these other things that may be performative, right? This performative allyship, right? As opposed to that, be like, how much are they paying their workers? Do they offer benefits, right? Anti-poverty action needs a flare of populism for it to work. You need a little bit of populism. Activism should become anti-poverty, and anti-poverty is something that could unite people across racial and class lines, which is an argument that many people make, right? Rather than focusing on race, you should focus on class. But then some people say don't focus on class because then you forget about race. It's a very complex issue that I certainly am no expert on. But anyway, I do recommend the book, highly recommend it. Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. Check it out. All right, I'm not going to do any questions today, but I'm just going to get to a fiction book review, and then we'll be done. So you can hop off now if you're not interested in my fiction reviews. This is a book, though, that's kind of a classic that you may be familiar with. This is called The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. She's a prolific, one of the best fantasy writers of all time. Something that's interesting about Ursula K. Le Guin, if you sit down with a bunch of people and I've done many times, talking to people about like great sci-fi and fantasy, like, oh, who's the greatest author? Oh, who's some of the best, old school sci-fi and fantasy authors? Oftentimes, I'll be like, oh yeah, what about Ursula K. Le Guin? Literally crickets. People have never even heard of her, which is crazy. Ursula K. Le Guin has written some of the best books in science fiction and fantasy. She's probably best known for her Earthsea Wizard cycle, which I've read. Not the whole thing, but I've read some of it. Anyway, I want to talk about The Left Hand of Darkness. This is one of my favorite books of all time. It was written in 1969. It's about 300 pages. And I'm probably going to have some mild spoilers here, just some mild ones. I don't think it's going to ruin the book for you. But if you're sensitive to spoilers, then don't listen to this, okay? So this book, for me, was a masterpiece. It's technically it's in the Hainish trilogy, and it's like book number 4 in it. But you don't need to read the rest of it. You can just pick this up. It's okay. You don't need to read the other books in the series. You definitely don't. It's a story about discovering and eventually relishing those that are not like you, and in that difference, finding friendship and loyalty and love. It's a really ambitious book with a bunch of very important themes that come through by the end that left me just totally awestruck by the beauty of particularly the character relationships. The writing, even though this is written in 1969, the writing feels very fresh. You'll discover like a new alien world, and it's like a speculative fiction piece. And the alien world is not like on our own, but with a very peculiar difference. Human anatomy and sex have evolved quite differently on this ice world planet. It's told through the narrative of an alien visitor to this world who seeks to bring the world into the fold of a collective of planets. We gain insight into not only the vices and virtues of this new world, but the glaring misogyny of the would-be advanced society, which still clearly has a patriarchal structure. Through the eyes of this character, Mr. I, we learn about the consequences of gender binarism and toxic expectations of gender in Western societies. And it's not as if the lack of gender binary in this world has created like a utopia on this planet. It's a culture struggling with its own problems of corruption and human rights violations and dangerous political brinksmanship. The world building in this is just a triumph. From the political culture to kingdoms and peoples and weather and terrain, everything about this winter planet and its people and nations felt so believable and tangible to me. Le Guin is just a master wordsmith, using often simple word choices to describe scenes and relationships. There are so many quotable lines throughout this book. My favorite themes from the book were those of finding strength through differences, hence the title of the book, The Left Hand of Darkness. Darkness is the left hand of light in this alien culture, similar to the Daoistic yin and yang of the alien Mr. I in the book. Indeed, at the end of this book, when darkness and despair are most strong, it's when that you're on the brink of new light, which ushers in a new era. The main character learns from his own misogyny and understands that the alien people that he's more now familiar with to him are his own people. And I love what Le Guin does with the concept of patriotism in this book. While patriotism can certainly be like a uniting force, it's often toxic, resulting in really horrible rationalizations and, frank human rights violations that occur in this book. It is when seeking the greater good of all people everywhere that patriotism must be superseded. And this brings me to the crown jewel of this book, the character Estraven. He's a man of political prestige brought to the depths of poverty with unclear motivations. His despair is so relatable, and he's just this gentle, inviting character. The relationship between Estraven and Mr. I has been one of my favorite I've come across in a long time. Estraven, we learn about, he's a patriot, someone who's willing to be a traitor to his own people for the good of everyone. The criticism I read about this book, about it, that it's paradoxically anti-feminist impact, I think that criticism is totally ungrounded. The misogyny of the narration is clearly, it's like a thematic device. It's told mostly through a man from a Western-like civilization. If anything, Le Guin is giving her social commentary about our own patriarchal system through the narration. The fact that she doesn't use other gender pronouns, like she just uses he and she, is a stylistic choice, one that's explained in the narration itself. This book is fantastic to help the reader subvert gender stereotypes and reflect on the illusion of gender roles. I think it's a total masterpiece. And I think I've probably made it sound a little too intellectual. I really don't think it's that intellectual. I think I'm like over analyzing the book. Like this book is not just about gender. Like it's a good sci-fi book. It's not just about that. It's a good story that anybody can relate to. You don't just have to be like a left-wing liberal, intellectual or whatever to enjoy this book. I think anybody can enjoy it. I think I've made it seem like it's a little too intellectual, which I think it can be enjoyed on many levels. So I highly recommend it. It's called The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. Anyway, that'll wrap it up. Email me at icudoctorecmo@gmail.com. I'm on TikTok at icudoctor is my handle. Let me know. Please give me suggestions about topics to do on this podcast, because sometimes I get bored hearing myself talk, and if there's a new topic that I think is interesting, then it motivates me to record an episode. So thanks. See you next time.